Lies have short legs in the desert, but truths here bury men faster than thirst. Thomas Mitchell watched the wagon approach through the curtain of heat that danced over the cracked earth. He had been waiting for this arrival for 3 months, since he sent the letter responding to the advertisement in the Denver newspaper. A mail-order wife. The solution to the loneliness that corroded his soul like rust on abandoned iron. At the age of 42, Mitchell was running the most prosperous ranch in the county, but his nights were populated only by the howling of the wind between the loose planks of the barn. The dust kicked up by the wagon formed a golden cloud against the sky without mercy. The coachman pulled the reins near the main gate, and Mitchell adjusted his hat, wiping the sweat from his palms on his canvas pants. 3 months of letters exchanged with Margaret Sullivan, a young woman from Boston, who promised to bring civilization to that arid immensity. The photographs showed a delicate woman with clear eyes and a shy smile. The coachman got off first, reaching out to help the passenger. A blue skirt appeared, then black leather boots, carefully polished. But when the woman lifted her face, Mitchell felt the ground shake beneath her feet. He was not the face of the photographs. It was similar, but something was wrong. The eyes were the same, blue as the winter sky, but there was a hardness to them that the letters never mentioned. The woman stared at him directly without lowering her eyes, as was expected of a lady. His hands didn't tremble, his chin didn't hunch in submission. There were small scars on her fingers, marks of hard work that didn't match the story of a young protégé from Boston. The blue dress, though well cut, showed signs of discreet patching. Mitchell walked toward her, each step heavy as molten lead. The sun beat down on his back, creating his long shadow on the dry land. The woman didn't move, didn't smile, didn't show the nervous joy he expected from a bride in uncharted territory. Instead, she studied it like a trader appraises cattle in the market. The coachman carried a single suitcase of worn leather and a small trunk. Few belongings for a lifetime. Very few for someone who should be starting a new existence. Mitchell stopped 3 steps from the woman, close enough to see the small wrinkles around her eyes, marks of someone who knew concern. The wind blew between them, carrying the smell of sage and parched earth. A hawk screamed somewhere above their heads, a high-pitched sound that cut through the silence like a sharp blade. The woman was not startled by the sound. His eyes remained fixed on Mitchell's, as if waiting for him to speak first. The horses shook their heads, restless with the heat. The coachman wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked between Mitchell and the woman, noticing the tension that was growing like a storm on the horizon. There was something wrong there, something that the letters didn't explain, something that the photographs had hidden. Mitchell took off her hat, revealing sun-scarred brown hair and a few grey streaks at her temples. His shirt stuck to his back from sweat, but he kept his posture upright, like a man used to commanding. The ranch stretched out behind him, acre after acre of land he had conquered with blood and determination. The woman finally spoke, her voice carrying an accent that wasn't Bostonian. He was rougher, more direct, like someone used to talking to cowboys and not to ladies in tea rooms. His words cut through the hot air like a cracking whip, and Mitchell realized that his life was about to change in ways he had never imagined. The coachman climbed back into the wagon, eager to leave before the midday heat became unbearable. The wheels creaked as he spun his horses, leaving behind a cloud of red dust and 2 people who faced each other as adversaries in a duel that had not yet begun. At that moment, under the relentless sun of the territory, Mitchell realized that he had received much more than he had asked for, and much less than he had expected. The woman identified herself as Catherine Sullivan, not Margaret. The twin sister. The words came out of his mouth like stones thrown into still water, creating waves that spread through the silence of the ranch. Mitchell felt the world tilt beneath his feet, as if the ground had caved in, revealing an abyss he didn't know existed. Margaret was dead. Typhoid fever had taken her sister 3 weeks before the scheduled date of the trip. Catherine explained the facts with the coolness of someone reading a medical report, her blue eyes never looking away from Mitchell's face. She had decided to come in her sister's place, to honor the commitment, to keep her word, as if marriage were a commercial contract that could be transferred from one person to another. The wind changed direction, bringing the smell of cattle grazing in the distant fields. Mitchell observed this woman who carried the face of her betrothed bride, but possessed a completely different soul. Catherine did not lower her eyes when she spoke. His hands moved economically, without unnecessary gestures. There was an authority in her posture that Margaret had never shown in her letters. She had worked in a salon in Denver, not as the women that decent men didn't mention, but serving drinks, cleaning tables, surviving in a world that didn't offer many options for women alone. His calloused hands told this story better than any words. Mitchell saw the small scars on his fingers, marks from kitchen knives and shards of broken glass. Catherine carried her own suitcase to the porch of the main house. Mitchell offered to help, but she refused with a dry shake of her head. The suitcase wasn't heavy, but the gesture said everything about who she was. A woman used to carrying her own burdens, not depending on the kindness of strangers, surviving on her own. Mitchell's house was solid, built of good quality wood and stone quarried from the nearby mountains. 3 bedrooms, a large living room, spacious kitchen with wood stove, imported from Chicago. It was the home of a prosperous man, someone who had worked hard to turn wild land into respectable property. Catherine examined it with practical eyes, assessing not beauty but functionality. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope about to break. Mitchell didn't know what to say, how to act in the face of this turn of events that no letter had prepared. He had corresponded with a delicate woman from Boston, but had received a survivor from the streets of Denver. The difference was like comparing a calm stream with a dangerous rapid. Catherine opened her suitcase on the bed, in the room that should have been Margaret's. His belongings were few, but well cared for. 2 simple dresses, carefully patched undergarments, a woolen shawl that had known better days. At the bottom of the suitcase, wrapped in a clean cloth, Mitchell saw the gleam of metal, a small pistol, the kind women carried for protection in dangerous territories. The discovery of the weapon changed something in the atmosphere of the house. Mitchell understood that Catherine was not a victim of circumstances, but someone who had learned to face them. The pistol was not there by chance. It was the tool of someone who knew the value of preparation, who did not rely only on the kindness of others for his safety. Dinner was served at the kitchen table, not in the formal dining room. Catherine had insisted on cooking using the groceries she found in Mitchell's pantry. His hands worked efficiently, turning simple ingredients into nutritious meals. It was not refined food, but it was solid, prepared by someone who understood the value of each grain of salt. They ate in silence, the sound of forks against plates echoing in the quiet kitchen. Through the window, Mitchell could see the sun setting behind the distant mountains, painting the sky with fiery colors. Catherine ate methodically, unhurriedly, but without wasting time. The difference between someone who had been hungry and someone who had always been guaranteed food was clear. After dinner, Catherine washed the dishes without anyone asking. His movements were economical, precise, like someone used to working in small kitchens where every wasted movement meant a waste of time and money. Mitchell watched her, trying to reconcile the image of this practical woman with the romantic letters she kept in her desk drawer. Night fell on the ranch like a heavy blanket. Catherine retreated to her room unceremoniously, closing the door with a firm that did not invite conversation. Mitchell stood alone in the living room, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling in, but feeling more lost than he had ever been on his own property. Outside, the coyotes began their nightly songs, wild voices echoing through the dark expanse. Mitchell wondered if he had made a terrible mistake in accepting this situation, or if fate had sent him exactly what he needed, even if it wasn't what he had asked for. The next 3 days passed like a strange dance between 2 strangers trying to find a common rhythm. Catherine would wake up before dawn, brew strong coffee, and head out to see the ranch. Mitchell met her in the most unexpected places, talking to the cowboys in fluent Spanish, examining the cattle with knowledgeable eyes, repairing the corral fence with skill that revealed practical experience. She was not the frail woman he had expected. Catherine carried hay like a man, tamed horses with steady hands, and knew the value of every animal in the pasture. The ranch workers, initially suspicious of this woman who had arrived to be the mistress, began to respect her when they saw that she was not afraid to get her hands dirty or to work under the scorching sun. Mitchell watched these transformations from the porch of her home, drinking coffee that she brewed better than any he had ever tasted. Catherine did not ask permission for her activities. He simply saw what needed to be done and did it. It was like watching a complex mechanism find its natural place in a larger machine. On the third night, she sat next to him on the porch after dinner. The silence between them had changed from uncomfortable to contemplative. The crickets sang their nocturnal symphony, and the smell of sage arrived carried by the cool breeze that finally brought relief from the heat of the day. Catherine revealed more about herself without Mitchell asking. He had grown up on a farm in Kansas before drought and debt forced his family to sell everything. Margaret had always been the delicate one, the one who learned piano and embroidery. Catherine had learned to shoe horses and to shoot accurately. When their parents died of pneumonia in the same harsh winter, the two sisters went their separate ways. Margaret went to Boston to work as a lady-in-waiting for a wealthy family. Catherine left for Denver, where she discovered that a woman alone had few respectable options for survival. The salon where she worked was no place for delicate people, but she had learned to defend herself, to recognize danger before it got too close, to never let her guard down completely. Mitchell listened to her story without interrupting, finally understanding why she carried that pistol, why her hands were calloused, why her eyes never averted when she spoke. Catherine had learned lessons that Margaret never had to face. She had survived where her twin sister might not have been able to. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching quickly. Mitchell stood up, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun on his belt. Catherine also stood up, but her posture was different. There was no surprise in his movements, just calculated preparation from those who knew the sound of trouble coming. 3 men emerged from the darkness, their horses foaming from the race. Mitchell recognized the leader, Jake Morrison, owner of the neighboring ranch and a man known for resolving disputes with violence before trying words. Morrison had coveted Mitchell's land for years, especially access to the river that cut through the property. Morrison dismounted with sharp movements, his 2 men remaining mounted as guards. His boots pounded hard against the wood of the porch as he climbed the steps. The smell of whiskey and sweat came before him, mixed with something more dangerous, the determination of a man who had made a violent decision. Catherine did not back down as Morrison approached. Instead, she positioned herself so that she could see all 3 men without completely turning her back on any of them. Mitchell noticed the subtle movement of her right hand, discreetly approaching the place where he knew she kept the small gun. Morrison talked about water rights, about deals that should have been made years ago, about how Mitchell had taken advantage of land that others could use better. His words were loaded with barely concealed threat. The 2 men who remained mounted had their hands close to their guns, waiting only for a signal from their boss. The tension in the air was palpable, like heat before a storm. Mitchell knew men like Morrison. They knew that words did not always settle disputes in the territory, and they were prepared to use more definitive methods when necessary. Catherine's presence complicated the situation. Morrison clearly didn't expect to find a woman, and her presence could either hasten or slow down any violence. Catherine finally spoke, her voice cutting through Morrison's threats like sharp blade. Her words were few, but charged with authority that made the 3 men look at her with new attention. There was something in his tone that suggested knowledge, experience with situations just like this. The night wind blew through the porch, causing the planks to creak under the men's feet. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, a wild sound that echoed through the dark expanse. The night had brought more than just the end of another day at Mitchell's ranch. It had brought the kind of confrontation that would define the future of all present. Morrison looked between Mitchell and Catherine, calculating odds that had changed with the presence of this woman, who was clearly not what she seemed. His next words would determine whether the night would end in conversation or in violence that would stain the dry land with blood. Catherine knew Jake Morrison. His words fell like hammer on anvil, echoing in the tense silence of the porch. She had worked at the salon when Morrison and his men showed up in Denver, drinking heavily and causing trouble that always ended with someone getting hurt. She knew his reputation, the rumors about farmers who had lost their land after refusing offers too generous, to be honest. Morrison paused in the middle of his threat, his eyes narrowing as he studied Catherine's face in the dim light coming from the window of the house. The recognition came slowly, like water seeping into dry land. He remembered her too, the woman in the hall who never lowered her eyes, who poured drinks without unnecessary conversation, who kept order when drunken men forgot their limits. The dynamics on the porch changed instantly. Morrison had come prepared to intimidate a lone farmer, but now he was facing someone who knew his methods, who had seen him operate when he thought no one important was watching. Catherine represented a different kind of danger, a witness to acts that men like Morrison preferred to keep in the dark. Mitchell noticed the change without fully understanding its cause. Morrison's posture became more cautious, his movements less aggressive. The two mounted men exchanged glances, feeling the tension change direction like wind before storm. Something had happened between Catherine and Morrison that had turned a direct threat into something more complex and dangerous. Catherine told Mitchell and Morrison about Charlie Brennan. He spoke in a calm voice, as if reporting indisputable facts. Brennan had been a small farmer with property near Denver. Morrison had made an offer for his land, an offer that Brennan had politely declined. 2 weeks later, Brennan's cattle began to die mysteriously. Fences were cut. The house caught fire on a windless night. Brennan showed up at the salon where Catherine worked, looking for men willing to testify against Morrison. He was desperate, talking about losing everything he had built in 20 years of honest work. Catherine listened to him, poured him drink, and watched as he left determined to confront Morrison directly. They found Brennan 3 days later at the bottom of a canyon, apparently the victim of an accident with his horse. But Catherine had seen Morrison and his men return to town that very morning, in dusty clothes and tired horses. He had seen the satisfied smile on Morrison's face when he heard of Brennan's death. He had kept this information as someone saves ammunition for the day when he will need to use it. Morrison denied it all with words that sounded hollow in the night air, but his eyes revealed truth that his mouth tried to hide. He knew that Catherine had connected events that others had accepted as tragic coincidences. He knew that she possessed knowledge that could destroy the reputation he had carefully built as a respectable farmer. The threat now worked in both directions. Morrison could try to intimidate Mitchell, but Catherine could expose secrets that would ruin Morrison if they reached the right ears. It was a deadly stalemate, two predators measuring each other before deciding whether it's worth the risk of attacking. Mitchell finally understood the situation completely. Catherine had not only arrived to be his wife by mail, she had arrived carrying dangerous baggage from the past, knowledge that made her a target and a weapon at the same time. His presence on the ranch changed everything, transforming a simple dispute over land into something much more complex and potentially lethal. The two mounted men moved restlessly in their saddles, horses noticing the tension of their riders. One of them, younger, had his hand resting on the handle of his gun. His eyes moved between Catherine and Morrison, expecting order that could come at any moment. The night had become the stage for confrontation that could erupt into violence without warning. Morrison retreated a step, but was not withdrawn. It was a strategic repositioning of a man calculating his next move. He looked at Catherine with barely concealed hatred, then at Mitchell with renewed contempt. The presence of this woman had complicated his plans, But men like Morrison always found ways to get around obstacles. Catherine held her position, hand still close to the concealed weapon. Her eyes didn't leave Morrison, but she was aware of the other two men's every move. He had survived years in Denver, paying attention to details that naive people ignored. He knew when men were about to make violent decisions. The wind changed again, bringing the smell of distant rain. Clouds began to cover the stars, turning the clear night into denser darkness. Morrison looked up at the sky, calculating time, and then made a decision that would change the course of events to come. He mounted his horse with deliberate movements, his men following his example. But before leaving, Morrison made a promise that echoed through the night like distant thunder. His words carried the weight of a man accustomed to carrying out threats, and Catherine knew that the war had only just begun. The first drops of rain began to fall as the riders disappeared into the darkness. Catherine remained motionless on the porch, watching until the sound of hooves was lost in the distance. The coming storm would bring relief to the dry land, but also cover for men who preferred to work in the shadows. Mitchell broke the silence that followed Morrison's departure. His words were direct, blunt. He wanted to know exactly what he had gotten himself into by accepting Catherine into his home. He wanted to understand the dangers she had brought with her, hidden like serpents in her luggage. Catherine told everything. About the other farmers who had died in convenient accidents after refusing Morrison's offers. About the conversations he had overheard in the hall. Whispered shots between men who thought women didn't pay attention to important matters. About documents he had seen being burned after certain people disappeared. The rain intensified, drumming on the roof like impatient fingers. Mitchell realized that his orderly life was over the moment Catherine stepped out of that wagon. But she also understood something else. She had not just come fleeing from danger, he had come to face him. The next morning, they found footprints around the house. Someone had prowled the property during the storm, studying the terrain, planning. Morrison was not a man who waited a long time to act. Catherine examined the marks in the mud with expert eyes, counting at least 3 different men. Mitchell made his decision as he watched Catherine brew coffee, as if death threats were a normal part of her morning routine. He had spent years building that ranch himself, defending it against every obstacle the wilderness had put in his way. He would not allow Morrison to take him out without a fight. Catherine smiled for the first time since she had arrived when Mitchell announced her decision. It was not the sweet smile of a Boston lady, but the fierce expression of a warrior who had finally found a worthy ally. She had spent years running away and hiding. It was time to make a stop. They spent the day preparing. Catherine knew Morrison's tactics, his preferences, the way he liked to attack. Mitchell knew every inch of his land, every shelter, every advantage the land offered. Together, they created a plan that would use the strengths of both. The night arrived with clear skies and a full moon. Morrison came with 6 men, expecting to find a lone farmer and a helpless woman. Instead, he found 2 strategically positioned snipers who knew exactly when and where the attack would come. The confrontation was brief but decisive. Catherine fired with deadly accuracy, each shot calculated and accurate. Mitchell fought with man's determination, defending not only his land but his future. When the dust settled, Morrison and his men had left or been carried, and the ranch remained in the hands of its rightful owners. Catherine and Mitchell were married 3 weeks later in the small church in the nearest town. It was not the romantic wedding of Margaret's dreams, but a union forged in battle and tempered by mutual respect. They had found in each other something more valuable than first-sight love, a partner capable of standing when life tried to bring them down. Years later, other farmers would seek out Mitchell and Catherine when men like Morrison threatened their land. The ranch became a refuge for those who needed a safe place to make their stop. Catherine never again had to hide who she really was, and Mitchell found that she had been paid much more than a wife. Sometimes, what we don't ask for is exactly what we need. If you were moved by this saga of determination and struggle in the wilderness, be sure to follow the next stories we have prepared about the challenges and victories of the Wild West. Click on the subscribe button so you don't miss any adventure, and share in the comments which part of this narrative moved you the most.